The 90s, a decade of prosperity, technological progress, and way too much hairspray. Back then, there was this little company called Marvel that was in the business of selling comic books. It worked for a while, and while the comic book world wasn't growing exponentially, it was growing. Unfortunately, everything has to come to an end, and so after speculators started to enter the world of comic books, and comic books started to sell special variant covers of their books, a bubble began to form. When this bubble eventually burst, it led to several smaller publishers completely vanishing and to Marvel filing for bankruptcy. To save themselves, Marvel sold a bunch of movie and TV rights to other companies, and that is in short how we ended with the okayish X-Men trilogy owned by Fox and the great Spider-Man duology owned by Sony. What about Spider-Man 3? Hey, listen here, motherfucker. You better shut the fuck up about this movie, or I'm going to snap your head off. Fast forward a few years and we get the first movie in the MCU called Iron Man. It is a great success and spawns this giant franchise of movies that is still ongoing to this day and still rakes in a lot of money for Disney, and so I have to ask myself, was the MCU ever good? Is there a gradual decline? And when is the superhero fatigue actually going to settle in? Because this idea has been floating around for a while, and yet every single MCU movie rakes in a lot of money, sometimes more than the previous one. For example, as of February 2022, Spider-Man No Way Home, the name makes no sense by the way, is on the way of breaking $2 billion worldwide. At least when it comes to money, I think the MCU is still going very, very strong. So, I'm not here to talk about how the MCU will die, because it probably won't. I'm here today to talk about something else, the artistic side of things. To be more precise, the general trend in quality, but also the increase of inconsistencies similar to how comic books slowly over time got out of control. I know Marvel has its own classification for movies with the phases, and while I think that kinda makes sense, I have my own classifications. We have the Pre-Avengers Era, the Post-Avengers Era, the Road to Infinity War, the Endgame Era, and now we are in the Multiverse-Era. The Pre-Avengers Era contains Iron Man 1, 2, The Incredible Hulk, Captain America, Thor, and Avengers. This era sets up nicely how Marvel movies are supposed to look like and how they are roughly structured. Most of the movies have a slow first and second act, like almost every other movie, followed up by a bombastic CGI intense and battle-focused third act, kept by a movie stinger, which is basically an advertisement for the next movie. By the way, I'm not saying that all Marvel movies are the same, because they aren't. The point is that Marvel movies will always end on a CGI heavy and fight heavy third act. As far as I know, there's no other conflict resolution in those movies besides fighting. Anyways, while Iron Man 1 is heralded as one of the best movies in the MCU, which it kinda is, the world building in Marvel movies has never been the greatest. You can't tell me that you have a genius creating an endless power source which you use to power his suit and nothing in the world changed. With the arc reactor, we wouldn't need nuclear, coal or wind or solar energy anymore. Energy should actually become so cheap that it could be considered free, and suddenly you would have a bunch of people without a job. While I understand that it's difficult to figure out how the world would look like after arc reactor, Marvel writers don't seem to be interested in those questions that much. They do try to show a bit of progress in Avengers with the Stark Tower being powered by the arc reactor. It's a small step since they don't want to rock the boat, but it's better than nothing. Another trend that you can see in the Pre-Avengers Era is the quality of the movies very heavily, even though they have a very similar structure. And there's always one really bad movie. In this case, it was The Incredible Hulk. It had the typical Marvel formula of slow first and second act, and CGI heavy and fight heavy third act, but I just didn't like it. The Hulk itself is not a very deep character, to the point that one of his most well-known phrases is Hulk! Trying to write an origin/romance story around that is kind of difficult, as you can see for yourself. Let's put it like this. Not many people other than Marvel fans remember this movie, and even though I watched the movie recently, the only character I can remember besides Banner is Ross, who appears in other movies as well. A movie people probably do remember is Avengers, the first superhero team-up in the MCU that was also the culmination of all the previous movies. The movies that were missing from the Avengers lineup are Black Widow and Hawkeye, but those are not here for a reason. Before Kevin Feige basically took over over as the sole producer for the movies division of Marvel, Ike Perlmutter was at the top, and he is allegedly a sexist, racist, xenophobe, and allegedly would always block the idea of a female-led movie because those apparently don't sell. We eventually did get the Black Widow movie, but we're going to talk about it. Those who were already watching all the MCU movies before Avengers probably had an emotional investment by now. They wanted to see where Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America went. Potentially also Black Widow, Hawkeye, and Hulk, but since those allegedly don't make money, they are missing from this era. And so it was not surprising that we got the sequel to Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America. These movies once again culminated in Avengers of Age of Ultron, which used the most misunderstood trope that I hate to my core: AI being invented and turning evil. A true or general AI does not exist, and we do not have an example for it. We do not know how it will look like, how it will think, or how it will feel. But one thing is for sure, AI is not magic. If you want an evil AI, there's a simple thing you can do. Let someone write a line of code that says that you should kill all humans. You need to understand that the thing you're writing about in the first place before you can fool the audience. Like this, it seems like someone watched Terminator once and concluded that once random AI gets access to the internet, the only thing they can conclude is to kill everyone. That is not how it works. The movie still made a lot of money and was fairly well received, I guess, but once again, the quality of the movies vary widely, with Ant-Man being the most forgettable and Iron Man 3 being the worst. I know I'm repeating myself here, but once again, in this era we have one great movie called Infinity War, a few high-quality ones like Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Doctor Strange, and Civil War, as well as big fat bombs like Ant-Man, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and Black Panther.
Man, that's racist!
Black Panther's world building was pretty awful when it came out, and it gets worse every single time I think about it. High-rise buildings amid straw huts, futuristic transportation methods on one side and dirt roads on another, and calling a white man that just tried to help out a colonizer for no reason, even though you as a nation are hundreds of years ahead in technology, but you chose to hide yourselves from the rest of the world because you feared this technology could get into the wrong hands while your continent was being devastated by colonizers. How did that work out for you all? While annoying, all of it could still be explained away somehow, but there's one specific scene that shows how this world doesn't work even if you try to stretch it as much as possible. After T'Challa, Nakia, and Okoye bust the trade between Klaw and Agent Ross, a chase ensues in which Klaw's men are using guns and Okoye is using a spear. In the midst of this chase scene, where they're getting shot at, Okoye says,
"Guns. So primitive."
The only reason they aren't dead is because of plot armor, and with not a single ounce of self-awareness, they let this character say that guns are not as civilized as spears. If this is supposed to be a joke, it's hilarious, but everything from how it's shot, to the delivery, to the eventual successful spear throw points towards the idea that spears are indeed more civilized and effective than guns. I can understand the argument that when you use spears instead of guns, you give your opponent a bigger fighting chance and their survival rate is higher, but in this case, we're talking about vibranium spears. It seems pretty deadly to me. By the way, this whole thing is a Star Wars reference and it makes no sense. Obi-Wan says that guns are uncivilized because it made his opponent suffer instead of giving him a quick death. Here, you are flipping a car with your spear, and you're making your opponent suffer with your spear. This quote doesn't make sense as its own unique thing, and it makes no sense as a Star Wars reference. I already need to suspend my disbelief with the traditional death fight for the throne, the heavy plot armor in the casino, and the fact that the society chose to do nothing while their whole continent was being devastated by outside sources, and yet with this singular line, they crumble the entire movie that was already standing on very shaky foundations. The implications of that line are so immense that not even if I tried would I be able to explain every single thing wrong with this statement. Also, for those who haven't noticed yet, Wakanda is a black supremacist, absolutist monarchy that not only forbids outsiders from entering, but also seems to harbor ill will towards everyone else. If you exchange all of those people for white people, we would absolutely call them the KKK. And those are supposed to be the good guys, by the way. Towards the end, they open up their borders, but in the MCU itself, it's pretty inconsequential, since you would actually need to think about how Wakanda would fundamentally change how everything works in the world. Pretty similar to how in the first Iron Man movie they didn't really think about the arc reactor, or in Captain America how they tried to hand wave away that there is no more super soldier serum, even though we got the Bucky, Red Guardian, and the World War II super soldier program that you can see in the Falcon show. Marvel already stands on pretty shaky ground when it comes to world building the further it moves on, but this movie just really pushes the Jenga tower over. But it's not like Marvel writers don't try to rectify that to a certain extent. Spider-Man Homecoming, for example, is basically a continuation of the Spider-Man we saw in Civil War, but also serves as his origin story. It doesn't screw the rest of the world, it doesn't retroactively change established history, it just takes what happened before and moves on. In this movie, you even have the attempt in figuring out the consequences of previous actions with the Vulture. Apparently, he turned into a life of crime because his business went belly up after Tony Stark and the government established a joint venture to clean up after superhero events, something that the Vulture was already doing. The movie really tries to figure out what the consequences would be for Tony Stark's actions, and I think it mostly succeeds. We also set up the relationship between Peter and Tony, preparing us for Infinity War.
You should have gone for the head.
Infinity War was the culmination of a decade of movies. There's so many characters doing so many different things in so many different locations. The big baddie that was teased way back in Avengers finally appears and wrecks every single Avenger. We have a non-stop fights back to back, and while there are slower scenes, the movie never gives the viewer a break, with the movie culminating a giant brawl between the army of Thanos and the Avengers in Wakanda. At the end, Thanos wins. He kills half of life in the universe and succeeds in his quest. The villain wins. There are flaws, of course, especially when it comes to military strategy on the siege of Wakanda, but all of those seem kind of small when looking at the movie as a whole. When I first watched the movie, I was shocked. A real shakeup in the MCU with enormous consequences for this world. What would happen next? Would they be able to continue writing in this universe? What will this world look like if most of the heroes are gone?
Is that like a personal attack or something?
The Endgame era is an interesting one because for some reason they're just slotting Captain Marvel in there before Endgame. Why? I don't really know. She has no established history, there was not a single hint towards her in any of the movies, and generally speaking, I don't know what this movie's doing here. And there are certainly many things you can criticize Captain Marvel for as a movie. The inconsistencies, of course, considering we are in June 1995, but there are several anachronistic things lying around. The fact that the Skrulls copy the DNA of people by looking at them, but also don't take on their traits, even though your DNA informs you how your body works. And that Skrulls turn out to be the good guys, but the question is, why are they being hunted by the Kree? Because the Kree seem to take in any race. So is this an intergalactic war for resources? Because the Skrulls don't seem to have many. Are the Skrulls that we follow the good guys, but the other Skrulls are actually infiltrators of planets that are tyrannical and actually the bad guys? Are the Kree just racist? We don't know. Anyway, let's talk about Nick Fury's eye injury. In this movie, we found out that a cat or Flurkin scratched Nick Fury's eye and therefore he lost it, turning this mystery of how he actually lost his eye into a joke. Not a funny joke, but an attempt was made. The point of Nick Fury's eye injury is that we don't know. It's part of his characterization. His secrets have secrets. The fact that we don't know where his eye injury came from is a testament to how secretive he is about his own life. That's the point. And yet this movie just says, nah, it's a joke. On the other hand, here's a scene that just basically breaks the movie entirely. After Danvers steals a bike from a guy and goes in a bar in the middle of nowhere, she meets Fury, and Carol questions if Fury is a Skrull. DNA apparently wouldn't match, so that's no good. She needs memories from the past, something that the Skrulls can't replicate. Carol asks some questions and Nick of course provides the answers. As proof that she isn't a Skrull, she shoots her light beam right beside Fury's head, destroying a music box. So, how does Carol know that Nick is telling the truth? Does she know him? Does she have a file on him? Can she read minds? And what about her proof? He just shoots a lightning and apparently Skrulls can do that? How do we know? How does Fury know? How does Carol even know? Most of her memories are jumbled anyways. You know what would have been a real twist? Carol actually turning out to be a Skrull, basically revealing that Larsen was working for Skrull all along and we didn't even see it. Now, that would have fooled everyone. The bar scene would still be stupid, since the only way to tell if someone is a Skrull is if you knew them already and can catch them in a lie, which they execute correctly twice later on. One time when Fury meets his boss and he traps him in a trick question, and once again when Carol's captain traps the Skrull disguised as Carol, also in a trick question. The bar scene makes no sense at all, and what if Nick Fury is an actual Skrull? He might be living on this planet for so long that he figured out the real Nick Fury's past and can just recount it, or he might be just lying. Watching the movie again, the only thing I can say is that the movie is super forgettable and really shoehorned in. I didn't like it, but what probably killed the discussion around this movie was all the political grifting going around at the time. Which brings us to Marvel's Avengers Endgame.
Perhaps I treated you too harshly. What did you do? I went for the head.
Endgame has high emotional payoff and is stupid. We have the final sacrifice of the character that has basically started the MCU with his iconic line of
I am Iron Man.
the three people that served as the backbone of the MCU, Thor, Captain America and Iron Man, basically fighting the biggest baddie that was teased way back in Avengers. Captain America holding Thor's hammer, showing that he's worthy. But unfortunately all of this is just nerd fuel. When you start diving into the movie, everything falls apart pretty quickly. Again, there are several things that you can criticize the movie for that could be explained away somehow. For example, Captain Marvel struggling to fight Thanos and is suddenly not struggling, Thor's belly that is constantly switching from small to big, and the whole bullshit with Pym particles not being reproducible anymore, while having a guy that deals with gamma radiation and biology, and another guy that figures out time travel in a few minutes. Which leads us perfectly into the topic of time travel. First thing, Tony Stark figured out time travel in a few minutes. Just saying. But let's leave it at that. Once again, we're suspending our disbelief as much as possible, but there's one scene that just breaks the mood. When they are about to do the test run, Brody asks why they just don't kill baby Thanos, which is a valid question, dark and horrible, but valid. Hulk explains that
Changing the past doesn't change the future.
which is their explanation of how they can time travel and not change anything in the future, even though they will change things in the future, just differently. This is also supported by a later scene in which is explained that taking things out of time creates branches in the timeline. It seems to be referring to Infinity Stones alone, but I assume anything taken out of time would create a branch as well. Problem is that Banner also says this.
If you travel to the past, that past becomes your future. And your former present becomes the past, which can't now be changed by your new future.
Exactly.
Are you sure about that? You say that so easily, but let's put that in an example. You travel 1 minute into the past and take the pencil from your desk. You travel back into the future and now where's the pencil? If changing the past doesn't change the future, then the pencil should be still there, right? But if the pencil is gone in the past, where does the pencil come from? Did the pencil just appear out of nowhere? Even if a new branch of reality is made, then the pencil's still gone from the main timeline, right? So where does the pencil come from? Please explain to me. The pencil is still in your hand, but it shouldn't be, because that would mean that traveling to the past actually did change your future, right? Well, it's a good excuse to try to explain that your type of time travel does work. Under further examination, it's absolute bullshit. And this movie has the gall to utter the line.
So Back to the Future is a bunch of bullshit?
Of course, Back to the Future is a bunch of bullshit, but that doesn't mean that your time travel is better, because the majority of time travel stories make no sense. Time travel never worked, will never work, and I've seen it only kinda done well in Steins Gate. And once you introduce time travel, you open the gates for all sorts of problems. Whenever something bad happens, go back in time, take Infinity Stones, change the present, bring the stones back. Also, you can still have a similar movie if we remove time travel entirely. Let's say, instead of destroying the stones, they got displaced. 5 years later, they find out that they can still fix the situation by finding the stones and snapping everyone back to life like in the original movie. The Soul Stone could be gathered the same way like in the movie because it's just been sent back to the well. The Mind Stone could be a maze which induces a challenge for those who wish to possess it. Here you could insert the part where Cap and Tony go back to the past and have to let go of the thing they desire. The Power Stone could be a challenge to Hulk, with the stone overpowering him with an angrier version of himself and him trying to fight himself back, or trying to find back the anger that he lost. The Reality Stone could be a challenge to Nebula and Rocket, where they are given their families back, mainly Gamora, but to save everyone they have to give up this gift. The Space Stone is a bit difficult to weave in there. This could be the stone that is randomly found by someone. Captain Marvel maybe, because she also has powers of a stone in her, and also she's kind of connected to the stone, so maybe she can feel where it is. Something, anything. And once everyone is snapped back, it could have the effect of snapping back Thanos' army, who attacked the Earth, which could lead to the same fight as before, and instead of Thanos trying to snap everyone out of existence, you could have a follow of Thanos trying to do that was set up in the very beginning of the movie maybe. Same emotional payoff, but now without the time travel.
They'll never know what you sacrificed for them.
Sacrifice what, Monica? Do you have a brain? She didn't sacrifice jack shit!
In the current era, which I call the Multiverse-Era, we have Black Widow, Eternals, Shang-Chi, Falcon, WandaVision, Loki, Hawkeye, What If, and Spider-Man No Way Home. Upcoming movies will be Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Thor, Love and Thunder, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, The Marvels, Ant-Man and Wasp Quantumania, and I'm sure one of those movies will be good, but since this era of Marvel movies and shows is very mixed, I wouldn't put my hopes up. Dead, 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 ribs broken, legs broken, dead, 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 super dead, dead stump, holy fuck. Who wrote this? In Eternals, I fell asleep because I was bored out of my mind. Shang-Chi had great fight scenes and that's it. Loki basically assassinated his character entirely and the protagonist wasn't him anyways, it was woman Loki. In WandaVision, Wanda is actually turned into a villain, which would be cool if the show didn't try its hardest to make her the good guy. Falcon and the Winter Soldier is such a waste because I love Falcon, but yet again the world building is completely broken. What If, while fun, had a lot of problems, and Hawkeye, well, I will let Sauce take that over.
Hawkeye is currently the latest Disney Plus show. It is about the lingering consequences of Ronan's actions. Ronan is an infamous assassin who moitered drug lords and crime bosses during the aftermath of the blip, where half the universe got game-ended after a purple guy snapped.
You should have gone for the head.
So, for the average Joe Schmo, you're probably asking, well, what does that have to do with Hawkeye? Well, motherfucker, Hawkeye is Ronan! Ba-ba-ba. After Tony Hawk and the Horn respawn everyone, Hawkeye gives up being Ronan, and the Ronan suit probably gets snatched up by someone. However, the trail continues as Kate Bishop, an athlete who's inspired by Hawkeye, sneaks into a black market auction where the suit is being sold, and ends up putting on the suit momentarily to hide her identity. This causes Clint to seek her out and stop her, so that people don't do some digging and find out, oh shit, that's me! In the meantime, Kate finds a man from the black auction moitered, and spoiler alert, the moiterer is her mom, who had to moiter him after a deal with a certain crime boss. And in the meantime, a girl who goes by Echo wants to find Ronan for moitering her father. And in the meantime, Yelena is an ex-Black Widow who wants to find Hawkeye and murder him because she blames him for Natasha's death. God damn, Hawkeye is in some deep shit. Did I summarize that fast enough for you, Carl?
No.
Wait, what? What?
Absolutely fucking not.
Are you fucking serious?
Nope.
So you're not? What?
Never.
Alright, you know what? I'm just gonna... Hawkeye is currently sitting at a 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, do I think that's an accurate rating? Well, maybe. If I was a freethinker, that's right. In the 3 minutes or less I have to talk about this, I'm gonna go hardcore. I'll let everyone know I'm not someone you fuck with. Because I don't know, I'd give this show like a 7 out of 10. The only character I can't speak for is Yelena because I'll continue to cope by not watching this movie. But I enjoyed her presence, and I think the characters in the show are overall pretty interesting. Say what you will about the quality of these Disney Plus shows, but there's no denying that the reception of these once more secondary-ish characters have received a lot of love in the spotlight from fans. Hawkeye was never really that interesting of a character to me. I mean, come on, we all know the meme of how he's useless in comparison to the other Avengers. But in this show, he, the other characters, and the new ones are given a lot of personality I enjoy quite a lot. That is all to say, I'm going to be talking about a character in this show who I believe has been done extremely dirty. Ah yes, Wilson Fisk, the king of crime himself. Kingpin is played by Vincent D'Onofrio, and previously played the character in Netflix's Daredevil show, which, by the way, holy fuck, this show bangs. If you're really looking for a good Marvel show to watch, I really can't recommend you a better one than this. But anyway, reprising his role, he brings not that much to the table. I mean, they literally cut out a scene of him having a table talk. The problem with Kingpin and Hawkeye is that he's hyped up to be the big bad of the show, but to the extent that he finally appears in the second to last episode of the season via screenshot sent to Kate, and later finally shows up in the last episode of the season.
Look at this. Who's that with my mom?
Well, that's the guy I've been worried about this whole time.
The problem with this is that the character is hardly developed at all, and was only given a bit of breathing room in the final episode. And how was that screen time spent? Well, to be honest, pretty terribly. There's no way to sugarcoat this. The reliance of the cinematic reveal prevents him from being an intriguing character, or really a character to take note of at all. And it's even worse because now he's an entirely new character from Daredevil. It's like they wanted to introduce the awesome return of Kingpin, but he's no longer the awesome character we hoped for. We see him in a tacky office with an outfit that looks like he just came from Hawaii. And then they forcefully explain through dialogue the relationship between him and Kate's mom. That being, when Kate's father died, her mom Eleanor found out he worked for Kingpin, and that's how he made money for the family. Eleanor unfortunately had to take over, and there you go, that's how she's connected to Kingpin. We see this in the scene that... Wait, what? This is the cut table talk scene. Why not have just kept this scene in and cut all the unnatural dialogue that was exchanged here? This probably was due to Marvel giving them a minimum amount of time, and I won't deny that contributed a lot to the show's rushed ending. Hawkeye was genuinely going on to become one of my favorite Marvel Disney Plus shows, and it sucks Marvel didn't give them the proper time. This is why we've seen tons of cutscenes released. Getting back on track to the big peen, the only time the dialogue has felt natural was when Kingpin and Echo were conversing. Bringing up some forced details made more sense because Kingpin and her are like family, and you guys know how your parents always bring up reminders that can sometimes be understanding, but also kind of annoying. Aside from this, it just gets much worse. He throws off a car door and introduces himself like a jackass, all while trying to intimidate Eleanor. Oh yeah, this is definitely intimidating compared to the second ago, where the driver was moitered. Luckily, Kate is here to save the day.
What are you gonna do with that?
What's she gonna do with that? It's a fucking bow and arrow! Take a guess, dumbass! Why did they do my boy so dirty? He was at the top of the game in Daredevil, blowing up his business partners, throwing them down elevators, letting one of them fight Daredevil so he could come in for the kill.
I'm gonna kill you. Take your shot.
If you pick any scene from Daredevil, chances are Kingpin will seem a billion times more intimidating.
Yes, the son of a boxer. You're all running this place. You did set him free. You ask such spare questions, Mr. Murdoch. You're regaining power in here. Yes, ask my lawyer. He'll deny it. Ask the guards. They'll deny it. Ask the inmates here. They'll cut their tongues out before they talk. But I have something to say to you. When I finally get out of this cage, I will dismantle the lives of the two amateurs that put me in here. You, Mr. Murdoch, and Franklin Percy Nelson.
Now we have a fat bastard who just came back from the Bahamas asking what somebody's gonna do with a bow and arrow pointed at him. And if you thought that was a nitpick, he's hit by a fucking car seconds later, fights Kate Bishop, an inexperienced archer, in a toy store, and fucking loses! Oh yeah, he then gets shot in the face off screen by Echo. So there's that. And for some reason, people insist that this is what makes him scary, but I think it does the complete opposite. Like, okay, I get it, he's got the durability of a fucking Metapod, but other than that, he's just incredibly weak and stupid. In return, they made him more comical than the fucking Kingpin from Spider-Verse, whose character design is literally meant to be as comical as possible!
Family doesn't see eye to eye. Was that the...
This, as you know by now, is a stark contrast from Daredevil's Kingpin, and just reminds me of how much I really dislike this iteration of him. Daredevil's Kingpin never would have let this shit happen. And yes, I'm absolutely 100% biased to Daredevil's Kingpin. It's hard not to be. And it is incredibly difficult to suggest a constructive fix for this that doesn't involve scrapping this entire scene as a whole. And if I were to say something like, Kingpin should have handled this through other means rather than showing up himself, ultimately, that would have just been from my preconceived knowledge of this character through the show Daredevil. Truth is, there's almost no advice I can give, because as I've said, this isn't really a character. The advice I do have would just be writing a different Kingpin. He has a motive, sure, but other than that, he just does. And while there's technically nothing wrong with showing up himself, when he's defeated so easily and looks like a fool, how am I supposed to believe this is an extremely threatening villain? Hawkeye is afraid to mess with him, and literally tells Kate, not many people walk away from that.
Well, that's the guy I've been worried about this whole time. Kingpin. I know tonight was a lot. You took on Kingpin all by yourself. Not many people walk away from something like that.
Really, dude? Are you sure? I'm confident I could have bested that fat bastard by just throwing a banana far away from me. Oh yeah, and you know how I said he was shot in the fucking face off screen? Well, there's a 90% chance he isn't dead. This scene is most likely inspired by this comic, and here's my take on it. I don't know the complete context of the comic, but I can confidently say this was a bad idea for the show. Getting shot in the face, probably even his eyes, only for him to recover, is pretty impractical. And, oh yeah, comical. Unless the writers were forced at gunpoint to put this in like Willy, then their excuse to me that it's from a comic is meaningless. If the writers can pick and choose what from the comic stays in and what stays out, this is 100% undoubtedly their fault and their fault only. No one else's. I've been the Legend Sauce. Go die. I meant goodbye. Fuck, I'm pissed.
Had talked about doing a heavier set version of Kingpin, but ultimately we wanted to go completely different in a different direction for this character. To put him in that Hawaiian shirt was kind of like a dream come true.
You haven't called.
To finish off this video, I want to talk about the latest movie in the MCU because I think it shows how the MCU works and gives us maybe a look into the future. After Mysterio reveals the identity of Spider-Man to be Peter Parker and he's accused of being Mysterio's murder, Peter's life turns upside down and so he contacts Doctor Strange to help him out. Doctor Strange tries to use a spell to erase the memory of everyone that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. While doing the spell, he needs a lot of concentration and he just lets Peter be in the room, and of course the spell is fucked. Two questions: why is Peter in the room? And what about physical evidence like magazines, internet articles, videos, and so on? No matter how you push this, it makes no sense. Like in many other MCU movies. But again, it's one of those things that could be explained away somehow if you wanted to. Unfortunately, there are also things that we cannot explain away. This time, it's less of a scene and more for a general idea. The conflict of the movie surrounds the fact that because of the spell has gone haywire, certain characters have been pulled out from their universe into ours. Specifically, only people that know that Spider-Man is Peter Parker are being pulled into our universe. Of course, this begs the question of how Electro and Venom knew Spider-Man's identity, but that's besides the point. All the villains besides Sandman are pulled out of the timeline right before they die, and Spider-Man wants to fix all of them before they're sent back. Those people will still die once they're sent back, so the whole movie is completely meaningless. Forget about the whole thing, how Peter Parker with a small machine figures out how to fix Electro, Sandman, Green Goblin, Lizard and Doc Ock. The whole movie makes no sense because the main premise is broken at its core, but there are scenes that I like. The banter between the Spideys, the conclusion to the Goblin vs. Spidey arc, the fact that we see all the Spideys fighting alongside each other, and the fact that Peter has to live with the consequences caused by his decision. Of course, that gets diminished a lot when you start to think about how all of this was actually Doctor Strange's fault, but overall, as an idea, it was enjoyable. Dumb, but enjoyable. Still, it often felt that the writers needed to weaken and strengthen characters on the fly to have their scene. There wasn't a single thought put in how all of this makes any sense besides, this is magic! And while I enjoyed the movie is pretty much how all the modern MCU shows are being done. Not paying attention to the world building, forcing the square peg in the round hole, and writing what you want to write without thinking about anything else other than your message. So, was the MCU ever good, and is there a decline? Kinda, yes, the MCU was good, and definitely there is a decline when it comes to writing. It was always a roller coaster though, of good and bad, because there's so many different characters and stories you can like and dislike, and so many different things to appreciate and hate. There will always be a thing for you. At the same time, when you watch an MCU movie, there's this familiarity with it. It always has a slower first and second act with a CGI heavy and fight heavy third act and a sting at the end. People know roughly what they can expect. And while there are huge stinkers from time to time in the MCU like Incredible Hulk or Black Widow, there's always the next MCU thing right around the corner. Maybe at some point people might get bored of this universe, but comics have existed for a really long time now, and while there is a decline, manga is not far behind, and so it seems like the concept of a cinematic universe or universes as a whole, with all its flaws and inconsistencies, will just continue until the heat death of the universe. I know it's a not very satisfying conclusion, but it's most likely how it will turn out. I don't have to live until the heat death of the universe, and so I would like food on my table, so please give me money on Patreon, follow me on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube, second channel. Thanks for watching, take care of yourselves, and have a nice day.